Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Wednesday, November 25th, 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Mario Helwani inside our New York City studio. How about this? A special Wednesday edition of the show. Why? Well, it is Thanksgiving in the United States on Thursday. We did not want to leave you hanging, so we're doing a live Wednesday show. Don't ever say that we forget about our loyal fans and viewers out there. We had to come on to talk about all the madness going on in the world of mixed martial arts. Can't wait to get back into it, especially since I missed the last show. That was UFC 193 week. I was in Melbourne, of course. All right, let's get into it. We've got the returning Mike Chiappetta, BleacherReport.com. Great to have you back, my friend. Thank you very much for the time. Jeff Wagenheim, the man in the shirt of SportsIllustrated.com, is in the house. And, of course, the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com, is also here as well. All right, guys, let's talk UFC 193. We never had a show following the head kick heard around the world. Holly Holm, of course, the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. And, Mike, I am happy that you are here sitting in this seat. And, by the way, well wishes to Luke Thomas, who is still nursing an injured back at home. He is currently on the disabled list.
Is more like it. No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
We hope he gets well soon. Mike, I'm happy you're here. Following the win by Holly Holm over Ronda Rousey, you tweeted that the UFC isn't really pushing Holly Holm after the win. Since then, she has appeared
premature on my part.
literally on every single mainstream outlet.
Yes.
What do you make of this? Because let's be honest, you know, we've seen Chris Weidman pull off an upset and TJ. We've seen some big news in MMA. Honestly, I don't recall a time that the winner who pulled off the upset has been paraded around from Las Vegas to Los Angeles to New York quite like Holly has.
Yeah. And by the way, I will say that when I tweeted that, I did say, you know, at the time, I know a lot of personnel from the UFC was en route from returning to the States and stuff. So I said, I'll give them a chance to see how they do. They've done great. I mean, obviously, she's been all over, done a lot of major shows, as you said. And a lot of people, I've seen this sentiment on social media a lot where people are like, well, they just slotted her into Ronda Rousey's appearances. No, that's not how major television works. That's not how major media works. They're going to take who they want. They're going to speak to who they want. If they have no interest in you, they're not going to speak to you. I think Holly just has a really interesting story. You know, the preacher's daughter thing, she comes across really well. Ronda Rousey became such a phenomenon that just whoever beat her was going to get a ton of interest, but they've really taken the ball and run with it, putting her on all these shows. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it translates going forward. Does she become an overnight draw? Because I think coming into the fight, it was all about the Ronda Rousey show. You know, this was a Ronda Rousey event, and let's face it, she's the one who drew the 55,000 people to Australia, and she's the one who drew these million-plus people on pay-per-view as well. So, can Holly Holm capture some part of that market? I think she's really got an endearing personality. I mean, the thing with Beyonce, the Beyonce introduction story, I mean, you hear that, you're like, that's pretty cute. You know, it's like, it's hard not to like someone like that. Her likability certainly works in her favor. So it'll be interesting to see, does she get these same kind of appearances when it's closer to the fight? Because that's really what's going to help it translate into views.
And Jeff, I don't want to take anything away from Holly, but I do think that this speaks to Ronda's star power because everyone wants to talk to the one who knocked her head off. If it was just some other title fight, I don't know if she's going on Kelly Michaels. So, A, I agree that she's not taking Ronda's slot because it wasn't like she was penciled in for this victory tour after. But it says like everyone is like, who's this girl that beat Ronda? And I think while giving Holly a lot of credit because she has performed masterfully on all these shows, I mean, just think about how tired she must be at this point. I think it really does speak to just how big of a star Ronda currently is and was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is unprecedented. You know, in the aftermath of the fight, there was a lot of talk. Is this the biggest upset in MMA history? Some people say yes. Some people say no. You know, the Matt Serra over GSP or other fights were the bigger ones. But it's clear that this was the biggest upset in the sense of the mass cultural celebrity culture, I guess you would call it. Rousey is. I mean, I don't know whether we can speak about it in the past tense, but certainly was a star unlike anybody that the sport has ever seen by far, by manyfold. And so when someone like that has a misstep, especially a misstep like this, a thundering knockout, the person who executes that is going to get some attention. And, you know, it would be interesting to see how Holly Holm will be able to sustain it as her own story, because I do think right now it is kind of the story of the Ronda Rousey conqueror, but that only goes so far. The next time she goes out and fights, whether it's against Rousey or whether it's against somebody else, it's going to have to be Holly Holm's story.
You want to know why there wasn't a bigger outcry when Miesha Tate was looked over and Holly Holm was inserted into that? It's because they were all incidental. Didn't matter who they put in front of Ronda Rousey. That's how big her star had become. We talked about it. We went around and we were like, who should it be next? And I remember you and me, and we were saying, like, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you play anybody into that role, it's all about Ronda Rousey. What is she going to do? That's the sentiment of this whole thing. So the person who breaks that narrative and does it in such a dramatic fashion is obviously going to get that attention. I mean, that I don't know if it'll sustain. I think that Ronda Rousey had a way of staying in headlines by just being bold, by being a pioneer in more than one way, just sort of her audacity within the sport, which really translates well for the fight game. I'm not sure Holly Holm is going to have all of that. During the rematch, I can guarantee you that Holly Holm is going to blow up as big as she's going to get. Now, I don't know what happens beyond, like if they do the rematch, what happens beyond that, but I could see her star sort of fading just because I don't think, it's funny when you say, she's a professional. Well, she is a professional, but that's not always what we're looking for in the sport to lead the sport. You know, we like crazy, we like bombastic, we like those things. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how it plays out down the road.
This is, you're talking about though, those are the people inside the sport or who are the people who are watching the show right now. Interestingly, after the fight, a couple days after the fight, I was talking to two different people who are not big MMA fans. In fact, actually, I would say they're not MMA fans at all. One is a big sports fan. The other was not even much of a sports fan, but they knew who Ronda Rousey is. They knew that name because she had become, bigger than the sport. However, what they didn't realize, or what they learned right before the fight, was when the weigh-in happened and Rousey kind of had that little meltdown really at the weigh-in, and then when the fight night came, and even though it was, I don't think either of these people bought the pay-per-view, but they saw the clips afterward of Rousey refusing to touch gloves, and both of them said to me independently, "Wow, she's really changed. She's really become more of like a heel kind of person."
Right.
And now, people within the sport, people who are big fans of the sport, the people within the MMA bubble, this was normal for Ronda Rousey. This is the way she is. But people who are outside in the bigger culture just saw this big megastar, and all of a sudden, here she was acting in a kind of unsportsmanlike way, and so I think that kind of added to the luster of Holly Holm as well.
Not to mention, you're talking about sort of the magnitude of the whole thing. Emotional ties to fighters are big, and it could come from any sector. You either hate them or you love them. She sort of was split. There was a lot of people, I think, who just really held her up as an icon, as a role model, really. Like, there's a lot of people thinking of that. There was a whole other faction of people that just hated her, just wanted her to fall. So you get that, you get those two things. That makes for a very emotional fight. The stakes are escalated. The fight game, goes off of emotion. It feeds off of that sort of thing. So for the fight to go down the way it is, it just seems seismic almost the way it happened. Even to hear, I was talking to some people, even to hear, I believe it was Herb Dean, you can hear him in an audio thing when he's going, "Hey, talk to her when she's knocked out, talk to her. And I was like, the thing was so crazy as it's happening, you're like, man, that just shows Herb Dean's professionalism himself, just to be that calm and that collected in that moment, to be like, hey, talk to her, tell her the truth, tell her what happened. You know what I mean? It's just all of that, it just plays out in this real historic sense.
When you talk about, Holly Holm's marketability or her future, being what kind of star power she can build for herself. I mean, part of the thing for Ronda was her aura, right? She, people would compare her to Mike Tyson all the time, because it was like, what's she gonna do in there? Like, it's gonna end quickly and violently and just in a snap of a finger, right? And that's something that, as a fan, even just a sports fan, you will take the time to watch that, because that just air of unpredictability is like what we love about sports. So Holly doesn't have this body of work behind her that is well known, and she just has this one moment. Like, everybody knows this moment. She's authored, but she doesn't have the sort of aura, and I don't know if it's something that you can build, because with Rousey, it was sort of something that just came along with her. Mm-hmm. It grew with her as her career grew. Holly's sort of already, I don't want to say she's a finished product, but she comes to us as a champion. Rousey took steps. Sure. First, she got this popularity in the MMA world, and she kind of blossomed so much that we couldn't hold her in MMA. It was just she was too interesting, too charismatic. All these things, like the rest of the world wanted a piece of her. But Holly, she's almost a finished product. I mean, she's 34 years old. She's had a whole other career in a whole other sport. And so I don't know if she has all these sort of layers to unpeel as we sort of had with Ronda. So I don't know if that hurts her as far as like building an aura, building marketability, but she does have a cool story, being the preacher's daughter. Yeah. It's kind of cool that, she had this other life as a boxer and was a world champion and all these things. So she does have things that I think the media will be interested in getting that story out as she goes on.
And it's clear that the road to 193 was a success. I think they built it very well with those commercials and whatnot. The actual event was a success from a business standpoint. Post-fight has been, I think, a success for the UFC in the sense that Holly's victory tour has been fantastic and she's handled it all well. And I would imagine the rematch will be a success, maybe the biggest fight in UFC history if the reports are true, and Dave Meltzer is often very true. If it's number 2 or, if it ends up in the 3 range, over $1 million for a card like that, that's unbelievable. But if Holly Holm fights, let's say, Miesha Tate next, if Ronda Rousey takes a big break, is she a big enough personality? Is she a big enough name right now? Does this all keep going for her to where she is now a new pay-per-view draw for the UFC? Or does she really need Ronda to remain that? What do you think?
That's a tough one. Obviously they have that clip whenever they're going to promote her next fight. Even if it's not Ronda she's fighting, that clip is what's going to sell Holly Holm's next fight, whether it's Miesha Tate or anybody else. So, they've got to run that clip in front of some, big shows as they've done now, because let's face it, the news cycle moves so quickly. If she fights again in July or whatever, which seems to be maybe the intended direction, a lot of stuff's going to happen between now and then. It's going to be very easy to forget about Holly Holm. So we're going to have to do this whole thing all over again and remind people, hey, remember this young lady who just knocked Ronda Rousey's head off a couple months ago? So you have to sort of rebuild and start from scratch, which is no easy feat. But it looks like, the media is interested in her story. Will they be interested a few months from now in the same way? That's going to be quite a thing to see. But I don't know. I think that it's going to be a really interesting experiment because from the beginning, Dana White said, I'm not in the women's MMA business. I'm in the Ronda Rousey business. Now he has to be in the women's MMA business.
That's a good point.
And with, there's no other option. He's got to sell his other fighters and he's got someone that's very marketable. So his job is not impossible. But I think, imagine if Holly Holm and Miesha Tate sell 500,000 pay-per-views. I think that would be a pretty good number for her first time out without Ronda Rousey. I think that would be a great target. Could she do it? I think she can with the right push behind her.
Yeah, I think the bar has been set unreasonably high by Rousey's level of celebrity, and I don't know that anybody is going to step in and fulfill that or match that. But I think, as Mike says, something a reasonably large pay-per-view sales. I think that certainly the first defense of Holly Holm's title will draw big numbers. Not numbers like 193, but it'll draw big numbers. And if she fights Miesha Tate or she fights somebody else, I think it'll do well. But I think that going forward beyond that, is she going to be able to sustain that? Really, she has to sustain two different things. Is she going to be able to sustain her reign as a champion, and not just a champion, but can she be dominant? I think it's too much to ask her to be dominant in the way that Ronda Rousey was dominant. I don't see Holly Holm going out there and beating people, in 30 seconds, 16 seconds, 14 seconds. I don't see that. But is she going to be able to make somebody? Is she going to be able to make Miesha Tate or Amanda Nunes or somebody else look as bad as Ronda Rousey looked? That was really because the story of that fight was not just how good Holly Holm looked, but it was also how bad Ronda Rousey looked. And it's in a way that I know there are some people who claim, I knew that her stand-up was crappy. There was nobody out there who was talking about Ronda Rousey being as awkward as she turned out to be that night, because we didn't ever see it. How can you make that kind of a judgment when you're watching fights that are 30 seconds long and 16 seconds long? You just don't have the time to see her stand up at a high level. So nobody was predicting that, but we saw it. And so is Holly Holm going to be able to make other people look like that?
I just think there will be a drastic drop off, honestly, because one of the reasons she was so transcendent, I'm talking about Ronda Rousey, just because she was first, she was novel. There was all these things. There was escalating stakes. It's almost like with Anderson Silva. could this guy keep it going? The biggest part when he fought that I felt always was like, this could be the night he finally loses, right? Like, this was the draw. It was like Mike Tyson back in the day. Well, Ronda Rousey was in that space. But I still don't think anybody actually thought she would lose to anybody. I think it was one of those situations where we really thought we were watching a historic fighter who might go on to be one of the great sports figures of all time. I mean, she could have been cast in that for just breaking down the barriers and getting there. That's so much to overcome. Holly Holm only slayed the dragon. The dragon itself was what was the big appeal, right? It's like, so there's still going to be a nice number, I'm sure, attached on that first fight because she's so compelling in the way that she beat Rousey. But at the same time, I just think that the big transcendent part of it, where all those extra pay-per-views were coming in, it just goes away. That's why I kind of was touching on it a little bit. I just think the Ronda Rousey narrative, as we saw it, is done. You can't do it anymore. It's just she was first. She was the pioneer of the sport. She's the reason that Holly Holm had a platform. And it's just that whole thing goes away for now. Yeah. So I think it's going to be a pretty big drop off.
One thing I was wondering when I was watching the fight and in the aftermath, I mean, the knockout was so brutal and violent, and you saw her, she was obviously, having trouble understanding what was happening in the moment. There's a lot of like women and kids watching Ronda Rousey because she's kind of appealed to those demographics, way more so than a usual UFC event. And you wonder like if those people who watched it and watch Ronda Rousey get knocked out and see the results. Because, like, seeing her armbar somebody, I mean, sure, she mangled Miesha Tate's arm a little bit, a couple other people, but generally speaking, armbars are, you see the person's okay after. It's not, it's kind of more viscerally okay. But seeing her knocked out in that way, I think is a little more of a barrier to overcome to bring some of these people back. Now, some people I'm sure like it just fine. I mean, there's lots of violence in movies and things like that, but that there's a real significance behind what we saw past, who actually just won and moved their career ahead and who lost. There's like real physical consequences.
I would make the case that was the first mainstream result in UFC history in the sense that like I was just at my son's Thanksgiving party at his preschool and there were parents who know that I'm some sort of like MMA guy who came up to me and be like, were you at that fight, Ronda Rousey, when she got... No one's ever come up to me about Brock Lesnar, the biggest stars. Like, this was a big deal. Family members who know nothing about UFC and MMA everyone knew about this. Yes. This was major mainstream news because of who she was, how she lost, the fashion. I mean, it was unbelievable. Now, another big thing has been how she's handled the loss, right? She didn't do an interview in the cage afterwards. She didn't go to the press conference, and to criticize her for that is just absolutely ludicrous because people lose all the time, big fights, and she was probably concussed. She was beat up.
Absolutely.
Like, do we forget that
she's
people,
a human being?
Yes, people don't go to the press conference all the time. Obviously, we have forgotten that. But she did show up, TMZ, and of course that wasn't a planned interview, but she covered her face. She put out a statement via her Instagram, and she never said anything to Holly. She never said congratulations, nothing. It was just, I'll be back and things like that. And of course, she is a lightning rod. She's very polarizing. People have criticized her for this. How do you, how do you make sense?
Book?
I did read her book, yes.
I don't know if you guys have read her book. I know I've talked to you about it. You realize how she takes losing. You realize, like, how her mind works in that book. If you really believe that's an accurate representation of how she is, which I do, just through the course of time, she just doesn't, losing is not something I don't think she really processes,
Right.
Like that's not something she expects to happen. Even the Olympics then getting the bronze, it seemed like it really affected her and it made her feel, somewhat of a failure really, like in those ways. And I think she just handles it that way. So the psychology of her losing this fight on the biggest stage like this, breaking UFC records, Holly Holm knocking her out, that's a lot to process for somebody in her position, especially somebody where, Beyonce is showing her, stuff. I mean, just all of that transcendent stuff that's going on pop culture-wise. It's just, there was a lot to lose. She knew it going in. I didn't feel like she was complacent. She kept talking about how, all of this goes away, the movie roles and everything, if I start to lose, She lost. I feel like that's one of those seismic type of things that happens, and you just, how do you process it? And I feel like she was in that space. She's going to probably be in that space. I'm sure right now she's like figuring out what all this means. There's a lot to sort of unpack in that type of thing.
I kind of wish that Travis Brown had taken that cockroach from TMZ's camera and just smashed it on the floor. I mean, I know that it would have probably got him arrested or whatever, but I just sort of wish that was the moment that I was sort of hoping to see happen.
That's what you were shooting. So you think that TMZ crossed the line there?
Unfortunately, they do that.
Well, where is the line? I mean, I think that the culture that has created that and we call it media or we call it journalism, it's just nonsense. I mean, the idea that people are leaving the airport and we've got these numbskulls walking along. Hey, what do you think of come on, it's just craziness.
Yeah, I think once people like glom onto this celebrity, whatever they're in, whether it's sports or entertainment, whatever, you feel like this sense that you have a piece of them. It's like this sort of entitlement feeling where it's like you owe us something.
Right.
Yeah.
She went in the cage and she fought. She did what she was supposed to do. She got knocked out for your viewing pleasure. So after that, she doesn't really owe you anything. She did a build up to the fight. She did a million interviews. Now I could understand people saying, well, she should be a better loser or more gracious in defeat. Okay, but she doesn't have to be. She doesn't owe that to anybody. Like, she said something very telling in the lead up to this fight. I wrote a column for Bleacher Report just before the fight, and it was called like the Fame Machine will eat Ronda Rousey alive or die trying, because I thought it was very interesting when she talked about, Holly Holm doesn't want this. She thinks she wants it, all this and everything that comes along with it, but she doesn't. People don't know what they're signing up for. And when you think about what she's trying to tell us, really, is like probably her world is just like a vice grip, because there's all these. I mean, think of all the stuff she did in the lead up to this fight. She released a book. She helped release a couple of movies. She did like all these global tour events for media.
Hosted Sports Center.
Hosted Sports. She did a million media interviews. That is a lot of pressure.
By the way, how about all that controversy surrounding her with her mom?
Absolutely, yes. So think about all those things that are just like closing in on her all the time. Like, you have to be here, you have to do this, you have to do. Everybody wants your time, everybody wants a piece of you. And then you have to go out and fight this person who has like probably like 1/10 of the distractions and has been preparing for you. By the way, when she announced she was coming to MMA full time, who does she target? Ronda Rousey. That's the person she's been preparing for since she turned pro in MMA for 3 years. Yep. She's been preparing for this one person, right? So think about that.
Okay,
think about all this stuff preparing for. What does she owe us? She owes us a what? To say I'm sorry for what? Get out of here.
You're right, Nick. I like the fire. So there are a lot of smart people who say it would be a gigantic mistake for Ronda to fight Holly in her next fight. And to a degree, it might make good business sense for that pay-per-view for the UFC to do the rematch right away. But if she loses, now you're in that sort of Joseph Benavidez, Uriah Faber, Chad Mendez category where you have now lost to the champion twice. What do you guys make of this? Because at first I was thinking it's a no-brainer. This will be the biggest pay-per-view in UFC history. If 193 was truly number 2, you have to go with the rematch right away. But all these smart people keep telling me it would be a huge mistake. What do you think?
I think it has to do with. I think it depends on Ronda Rousey's mental state. I don't think it. I've heard people say, well, she needs to revamp her stand-up. I don't think that physically. I think that the physical person that Ronda Rousey is right now could go out and compete with Holly Holm, and if she approached the fight differently and didn't, I think there was certainly some ego involved in her wanting to stand up with Holm. At a certain point, I think she realized that she wasn't doing very well, and she tried to take it to the mat. But I think the physical person, Ronda Rousey, could compete with Holly Holm and would have and could beat her. She's beaten everybody else. I think it's not out of the question that she could beat. I think Holm could beat her too, but I think it's a fight that would be a really good fight. But I think that's not the real question. I think the real question here is the mental state. I mean, I think that we know we know that Ronda Rousey was broken by this defeat. We could see it the way she reacted, even in that TMZ walkout. She didn't walk out there proudly like I'm going to go and take it back and take my belt back, all that kind of stuff. So we know that there was some level of her being broken. Well, how sustained is that going to be? Is that 2 months from now? Is she still going to be heartbroken and unable to function the way that she's functioned before? Is she going to go back into the gym? Is she in the gym right now as we speak, quietly preparing to do it? So I think that it all comes down to that. It's all about what's going on in Ronda Rousey's mind right now, and I don't think any of us can tell. I think she's the only one that can tell.
If I'm Holly Holm, I want that rematch immediately.
100%.
Because it's odd too, because I think it was Michael Bisping who was on your MMA hour recently, and he was saying, like he's gone through some incredible knockouts, like obviously the Dan Henderson one. He heard about the hatred. He had to sort of get out of that light for a minute and regroup, because you can't fight emotional. That's going to be difficult for somebody like Ronda Rousey who fights emotional anyway. Like she feeds off of her own emotions, I think, to get ready for the fight. She comes out storming out there with emotion one way or another. She wants to fight. Now you're telling her to separate herself from that. You're actually telling her to reprogram herself. And I feel like those things are they're very difficult. Like tactical approach suddenly. Like we're talking about how's she going to do this? She's never had to worry about that before. There's a lot of different considerations to go into this now. If I'm her, I don't do it. I just go do my move, and I would let Holm. You can get more footage on Holm. You can refigure out what you want to do with your camp. You can reset. You can put that at a distance. That's the way I would handle it. I understand from the business standpoint. Obviously, the bigger fight is to just do the rematch, but it's tough. It reminds me a little bit. Holly Holm reminds me a little bit of the Chris Weidman, coming in, because he knew he was going to have to beat Anderson Silva, and he knew he was talking about, and I know I'm going to have to defend. I'm going to have to fight him again. Same thing. I felt like Holly Holm knew the whole way. I'm going to have to beat her, and then I'm going to fight her again. To a lesser degree,
right? Because with Chris, there was that, he was showboating, he caught him.
Of course.
But remember, Chris said it from the beginning. I'm going to beat him, and then I'm going to give him a rematch.
Yeah, the whole way.
Beat him again.
That's all I meant. From the very beginning, he knew what he was going to have to do. I feel like Holm's already in that space. She's already made very comfortable in what she has to do. Now it's all up to Rousey, like you said, having to kind of regroup and figure it out.
Yeah, for Holly, it's a no-brainer. She wants the rematch right away. I mean, it's going to be the biggest payday of her life. Obviously, she's showed that she has all the tools to beat Ronda, and she's at the height of her confidence. Makes all the sense in the world. For Ronda, I agree with Chuck. I think she should take some time away. Take care of the rest of the affairs in your life. Take care of yourself physically. I mean, she's been basically on a treadmill that just keeps going faster and faster since she signed with the UFC. I mean, she came in with a belt on her shoulder, and she just never stopped running.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to wear out, and I think that's a little bit of what happened to her. Now, that said, I think Holly was just better than her on that day, and Ronda certainly has things that she needs to work on. I wrote after the fight that I thought that she should take a little bit of time off. You saw her make a lot of basic mistakes with her footwork in that fight. She couldn't stay outside of Holly's lead foot, and so she made herself very susceptible to that straight left down the middle, which against someone who has boxing capabilities that Holly Holm does, that's a big problem. And that's something how does that happen? How does that happen when you know that Holly's footwork is going to be so great? I think you also have a little drama going on in her camp with Edmund Taverdian and what's happening with him with his bankruptcy. So is he all the way invested in what he's doing? I don't know. He may very well be in training her, but I think it wouldn't hurt to have her bring in a top strategist in MMA. Like you saw in between rounds, the differences between corners and the advice that they were giving. Very specific advice in Holly Holm's corner, and in Ronda's corner, she was basically told she was doing well, which was the furthest thing from the truth. So I think she needs someone in her corner that is going to give her, better strategic advice in the lead up to the fight, prepare her for, some of the things that Holly Holm is going to do, just the same way that Holly did to her. She needs to kind of flip the script.
Edmund has received a lot of criticism, and I think rightfully so. I think the criticism that he has received about that particular clip is a little bit unfair, because you could tell he was rounding the corner. He was almost trying to calm her down, say, and it probably wasn't the right thing to say. She wasn't fighting beautifully. She lost that round, the first round of her career that she has lost. But you could tell he's about to start critiquing her, and then they switch to Holly's camp. So I feel like that's a little nitpicking, but I get your point. Now, okay, so this week it was announced by Invicta that Cyborg will probably fight at 140, although she's sort of refuting this now on Twitter, which is a bit of a strange thing. Let's just pretend that she's going to fight at 140, and then hopefully she can make 135. Do you have any interest in this fight anymore? Has Ronda's loss completely, ruined this fight? Is it one that you don't even do you not even care about Cyborg at 135 now? What do you guys think?
I was sort of thinking about this in general as this was all going on, all the sort of scenarios that change. This is definitely one of them, obviously, because we wanted to see the two forces that couldn't be beat collide. Well, one of them is this loss. Although now Holly Holm is that force that hasn't been beat. So I don't know if she sort of takes that spot, and suddenly we're going to talk about that.
There's that beef there.
Yeah. No way. So I feel like it all loses something. One thing I would say for sure now, though, is we've talked about this potential matchup for a long time. There's absolutely no reason for anybody to accommodate just, at 140, like at 140 now. I just don't see why you would do it. If you had a super fight and it was all about sort of putting that together, it made sense. But now you're sort of like, that super fight just doesn't exist right now. So I think it just sort of, she would have to make 135. And I personally feel like she's losing steam on that whole thing. I feel like, I don't know if she ever really believed she was going to get to 135. It's just one of those ongoing things. Now she's upset with the UFC with Joe Rogan's comments, everything else. So I'm like, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but I feel like it definitely loses some steam.
But can't you say that if, now that Ronda is not the champion, then who cares about making it a 135?
Well, I guess they could do that, but it wouldn't, what I'm saying is I guess it's not a super fight is what I mean. Like the only reason I was thinking before that there was going to be, you had these, it would be up for Ronda Rousey to be like, hey, I'm going to prove to everybody that I can beat her too because I've already beaten everybody else. I'm just saying that narrative is no longer in play. If Ronda Rousey is able to kind of regroup and she wants to do it, I'd still watch that fight. I think it would still be huge. It just loses something.
I think the fight itself would still be a compelling fight. I mean, just from the back and forth that they've created. I mean, there's a conflict there. There's a storyline, and I think we've invested ourselves in it for a long time, right? They've been talking about fighting each other for like 2 years now, probably longer than that,
yeah,
3 years. So I don't think everyone's suddenly going to just completely lose interest in it overnight. I think if they make up their mind that they're going to do this, the bickering between them will start, the storylines will pick up, and I think it'll sell well, to be honest with you, even if Ronda's coming off a loss. I don't think it really matters. I mean, it's just, a couple of years ago, Manny Pacquiao lost.
There it is. Have we all forgotten about that?
Yeah.
He got knocked out by Marquez.
That fight sold
Which one?
pretty well.
Over 4 million pay-per-views.
Yes, it sold pretty well. Now, obviously, they're not nowhere near the level. Well, Ronda's near the level of Mayweather.
Pretty darn close.
Well, I remember when Pacquiao lost that fight to Marquez. I remember thinking, "Oh man, the biggest loser here is Mayweather. He's going to lose his big payday." Well, that was pretty wrong. But I had that same reaction. When I saw Ronda Rousey falling down, I thought, man, this is a big loss for Cyborg. So there is that tendency, and I think everything that Chuck says, I tend to agree with it. But people forget these things, and in some ways, you just repackage a Rousey Cyborg fight. Well, now we've seen Ronda Rousey getting knocked out. Well, who was the biggest knockout artist in mixed martial arts? Probably amongst men and women. Yeah. It's Cyborg. Yeah. And so you're now putting somebody in who's just been knocked out against somebody who authors the biggest and most brutal knockouts in the sport. So there's certainly something there. And as you pointed out, if she's what is Dana White's biggest thing always been? Well, why do she rules the 135 division. She has no reason to go stand. Well, now she doesn't rule the 135 division. Now somebody else does. So there's certainly some reasons to match them up together. But I just have a feeling that Cyborg is just put on the back burner, and maybe she'll still be around when the time comes for Rousey to fight her, but maybe not.
She really can't catch a break when you think about it, because Cyborg, obviously, we're sitting here speculating at UFC 200, this is the time to bring these two together. Now suddenly it's all about this rematch, and then she's just pushed to the side. So you can't help but feel for her a little bit, even if she's trying to.
This has been going on for a couple of years.
She's been dragging her feet.
Yeah,
I mean, and even now with this fight being announced, she's dragging her feet again. I still want to see the fight. I'll see the fight next. If they package it as Ronda's return, her comeback against Cyborg, her rival, I mean, there's so many ways. Just think about the weigh-in and them going at each other. Everyone will forget the fact that Ronda lost, so I don't think they lost anything.
That would be the craziest thing if Rousey's next fight against Cyborg coming off this loss.
There are a lot of options. Okay, one last thing on all this, and then we have to move on. On Monday, I was talking about how it's almost like, how dare the fans act the way they have towards Ronda. I mean, if it wasn't for Ronda Rousey, there would be no UFC women's bantamweight title. And that's not taking anything away from the Gina Carano's of the world, the Tara LaRosas of the world. But Ronda, I mean, Dana White said it time and again, she's the reason why they got in this business. And if there's no Ronda, there's no Holly, and there's no Joanna Jędrzejczyk and all that stuff. And people are like, well, the reason that we acted this way, the reason why we're dancing on her grave, so to speak, is because of the way she acted towards her previous opponents, the things she said in the media, and things like that. And I was like, are you guys that gullible? You're playing into the gimmick here. She acted this way to get you to act that way, to get you to react that way. And now you're saying, like, we're acting this way, we're reacting that way because of the way she used to.
It's like suspension of disbelief in movies, Ariel.
Do people not get what she was doing? I mean, this is a person who's talked about gimmicks and pro wrestling and feuds.
I think you hold our demographic a little higher.
So I'm just surprised that people don't it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to say, yeah, screw her. She got what she deserved. but recognize why you feel this way. She got you to feel this way, and guess what? Every single one of those people who are saying, screw her, she got what she deserved, are going to buy her comeback fight because they're going to keep wanting to see it happen or want to see her come back. That's the brilliance of a prize fighter. You have to get people to care, good or bad. It doesn't matter as long as they're not indifferent.
So are you saying that that whole meltdown that happened at the weigh-in was just Ronda Rousey being a good businesswoman and she was just selling a fight?
No, that was a sign of a person cracking in front of us. But her not touching gloves, her telling Betch, go cry, her not shaking hands with Miesha Tate, that was her gimmick. That was who she was.
I think you've been watching too much pro wrestling. This is who she is.
Ronda watches too much pro wrestling.
This is who she is.
But that's something that she's put out there in the world.
You put that out in the world, and then you sow the seed, you reap the crop. This is the way it is. I'm not by any means excusing the vitriol that has been raining down on her in the aftermath of the fight, but the fact that she has been unsportsmanlike and mean-spirited towards some other fighters, this is what happens. People like to see that person fall. And people have been storing this up for so long because she would be that way, in her fights with Miesha Tate, but then she came out and won. She kept she kept building up this sort of the bad feeling amongst a lot of fans, and people waited and waited and waited, and
Absolutely.
then when she lost, it came bursting out in a really mean and horrible ways. And
Conor McGregor will get the same thing, probably to a lesser degree. But I'm not saying what she did was bad. I'm not saying what the fans necessarily did was bad. I just find it funny that people don't recognize why they feel this way. They fell into her trap.
They recognize it. I mean, maybe deep down they do. But what does it matter? Once you're invested into the emotion, what does it matter how it got there?
Maybe once you recognize, you can take a step back and say, you know what? I don't really need to send her that tweet or something. You know what I mean? And make a person feel worse. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a little too naive.
Like so naive, man.
This is very hippie of you.
This is the internet. The internet.
This is the game. Yeah, I know.
Have you ever been criticized on the internet?
Oh yes, trust me. We'll get to that in a second.
Fight game is cruel. She was a commander of that cruelty in some ways, more masterful than about anybody. You know what I'm saying? And when the cruel comes around to her, it's just the way it's going to be. I mean,
she can't complain about it. If she comes out and complains about the tweets and stuff that she has received, it will not be a good look.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you like when people manipulate your emotions?
No, but
because that's what she's been doing, right? That's exactly what you're saying. So maybe people don't like it for that very reason.
Maybe.
And that's
But hey, let's give her credit where it's due, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like somebody needs to lie down on a couch or
something.
something.
This is nice. Okay.
We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, exactly. All right, speaking of emotions and all that stuff, let's move along to Jon Jones, who, by the way, we know he's back. We know the suspension has been lifted.
Do we have to sit here and talk about that? Can we go take a walk and talk about
that? That would be nice. It's a beautiful day outside.
See you later.
No, but there's a great opportunity, especially if Conor, if things don't go Conor's way on December 12th, there's an opportunity for Jon Jones, following Ronda's loss. We'll see what happens with Conor. He could be, all of a sudden standing there and be like, I'm back, baby, if he wins that belt. Okay, so yesterday on MMAfighting.com, we posted this interview. I don't necessarily want to talk about, the questions. It's a little weird since I'm the one who conducted the interview, but I would be fascinated to hear everyone's take on what Jon had to say and, to a degree, his body language. I know you've been following Jon for a very long time. You've been covering a lot of his fights, and he's a guy that you've taken particular interest in. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, your first article for Bleacher Report was about Jon Jones.
Yeah.
So you saw Jon, this interview, he hasn't talked for 7 months. He hasn't talked since the accident, the suspension, the arrest. Who was this Jon Jones? Is a new guy? Is he genuine? What'd you make of him?
I'm not sure my feelings on this are fully formed quite yet, to be honest. I mean, I think I'm still absorbing.
Please watch it a few more times so we can get some.
Generally speaking, I thought he came across pretty well, but I think I've always had that feeling about him. Even though people say, he comes across, he's not genuine and all this stuff, and he even admitted in the interview that at times he hasn't been his real self and all that. But I mean, I've never really faulted people for that because it's like, who puts all of themselves into the way they present themselves? I mean, there's days I feel like a lazy slob, but I don't go outside with the T-shirt I wore to bed and shorts with holes in them. You know what I mean? Like everybody presents themselves to the world, tries to give their best presentation of themselves to the world, right? That's pretty normal. So if he has been a little bit, not genuine in moments, I kind of don't hold that against people the same way a lot of people do. And so I thought that he was pretty forthcoming in this. I mean, there were certainly certain spots where it seemed like he pulled back and measured his thoughts, composed what he wanted to say in a specific way. I have nothing against that. To me, that's all part of the same thing. I mean, you want to present yourself. I thought he was, fairly contrite about what he did and what he's kind of put his family and people close to him to. And I think that's really all he owes people. He really, and of course, the woman that he hit as well. I mean, those are really the only people that he owes things to. He doesn't really owe us to be the greatest role model in the world. If he is, that's great. That's a huge bonus, but he doesn't really owe that to us. So, that's generally how I felt about it.
I thought that he said some pretty wise things, and the one that I took away was when he said that I'm a work in progress, and I thought this is true. There was everybody is a work in progress, but I think Jon Jones, because of the way we've seen him evolve through the years, and in some ways devolve. He's seemed to be a more mature guy. Then all of a sudden he would do something dumb on the internet, that he would erase it, and so we were seeing some things. And I think that one of the criticisms I saw of his what he said in the interview, I saw this online a few times, where people were saying, well, he's so self-centered, and because he did talk about how this accident and all the aftermath of it, how it affected him. And he didn't really mention the woman. Well, he mentioned the woman, but he didn't really speak with any compassion toward even when he said, "Oh, I'm afraid this woman who's pregnant, and I don't know how pregnant she is. She's going to lose the baby." But he spoke about it more, how it's going to affect him in his life, which I'm not going to criticize him for that either, because this is real. I think if he had started speaking with all this empathy towards somebody else, it would have been the old Jon Jones of like, well, and my first thought as I was running away from the car was, I hope that pregnant woman, pulls through. I love that baby that's inside of her. No, he was thinking about himself. I felt like he was being real in that moment, and there were a lot of moments in the interview where I thought he was real. I don't think that he's, you talked about your opinions not being fully formed. I don't think that Jon's thoughts about these things, even about his career and where he's going, are fully formed, but nothing wrong with that. I found it to be a good look inside what the guy's thinking all these months after he had the worst day of his life.
The thing about duplicity, which is sort of how we think about Jon Jones, is you don't know what face value is anymore. It's like we watch a guy like him and you think, you want to believe him, because there's been other times through his career that you've wanted to believe him. You wanted to believe in his sincerity and all these things, but I think that Jon Jones has been two people for so long, and they've been sort of dished out in different ways for so long that you're not sure. It's almost, he's to the point now where his actions through the course of time are going to have to speak louder than his words. I mean, it's just as simple as that. There's nothing he can say that's going to change people's minds. I saw a lot of the backlash, like, oh, what a phony, he's insincere. Well, these things have been long-standing. It's just, you're not sure. You hope that you hope he's turned the corners he says he has. You hope that he's been introspective, maybe stopped partying as much, all these things. You hope all those things are true. But honestly, like you guys said, it's not, if he wants to be Jon Jones who's out partying and all that stuff, nobody's going to change that. It's up to Jon Jones. He's his own worst enemy, or he's going to be his own best friend down the line. It really just, he has a chance to come back and be the guy that everybody wants him to be in terms of a champion in the UFC, and I'm sure the company wants him to be on the up and up and all that. He's got that chance. What does he do with it? It's just over the course of time we're just going to have to figure this thing out with him.
I mean, and he also talked about some of the things, some of the demons in his life, his excessive partying and so forth. But he talked about it as though he's past that. And anybody who's been around, anybody who either is an addict or is even just someone who does something excessively, knows that you're not past these things when you've spent a few months, a couple of months, 2-3 months clean and sober. This is not reality. But I don't fault him for saying that, because that's the way people think. We think, well, I'm bigger than this. I'm choosing not to have drinks tonight, so therefore I'm sober and I'm cool. So I think that there is some self-delusion that's still there. At least that was what I saw a little bit of in that interview. But he's going to lead his life the best he can, and I feel like he at least there were certain touch points in there that I thought, okay, the guy seems like he's on the right road. We'll see whether the detours bog him down or not.
The hypocrisy, that we've sort of seen of Jon Jones is hard to overcome. It's like he's been basically hypocritical. He was coming across early on in his career like, hey man, I came up in this strict household, that's who I am, very innocent, we're going all the way back, and he's chasing down people and muggers and stuff like that. We thought he was on this cloud, and what you learn is throughout all of this, he's been the guy he's got in trouble for as well. And I think that sort of hypocrisy, that sort of duplicity, I think that's it's tough to overcome, but it really. Yeah. It's only because we've seen those signs. So you don't want him to play a hypocrite. One good thing about the interview you guys did is I felt like he was giving you the truth on that side of him. He was saying like, hey, this is all one Jon Jones. You were getting a sense that he's finally presenting himself as a whole rather than in pieces.
Yeah, I think the other takeaway I had was, I don't think, even though you spent an hour with him and there's a lot of feelings and emotions and things he uncovered about himself, I don't really think it's going to change anyone's mind from whatever opinion they had about him prior to that. Because, especially in this day and age, I mean, we see celebrities sit down for long interviews all the time after they screw something up in their lives. Right. And a lot of times, after they have this, really heartfelt confession or whatever it is they're explaining about themselves, they screw up again. We're pretty used to seeing that. I mean, people screw up. So I think, like Chuck said, it's really going to come down to his actions. I mean, he can say whatever he wants. It's pretty easy to appear like that for an hour, appear like you're humbled and changed and all that stuff. Maybe he is, I don't know, but he's only going to be able to show us by how he acts, not by what he says.
I will say though, feedback has been incredible. I can't recall getting this much feedback for really anything, or at least in the last few months. And I got a lot of people saying like, I used to hate Jon Jones, and now I'm kind of rooting for him. People like a good comeback story, and if you just kind of appear that you're remorseful, that you're going to change things, a ton of the comments were, I hated this guy, I thought he was entitled, I thought he was fake, but now I'm rooting for him. America loves a good comeback story. You guys are American, don't you know that? Right? You know all that. I mean, I got a ton of that. I also got a lot of comments about his comments about the UFC. And a lot of people actually, quite frankly, said, that's when I really felt like I saw the real Jon, because you can see the way he speaks about 151, about the Vitor Belfort situation.
Still biting his tongue somewhat. It's like
but there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, so speak to that. Do you feel like there's even more resentment there? Are you surprised at how that one line to me where he was like,
the iceberg stuff?
Yeah. They came. The first time they came was to take away my belt. The first time they came down. It seems like deep down, man, there's a lot there.
Sure, there is. That's what I caught too. Yeah. I mean, I'm only going off of what I saw him talking about there. But yeah, it seems like there's some deep issues that
line felt like something he wanted to say for a while. The first time they came was to take him, or it's been something he's been stewing within him.
Obviously, there's some things that he, over this course of time that have sat with him all this time. I'm sure that there's some resentments, but I thought they did come out. It was pretty interesting to see that criticism.
Yeah, I thought when he started talking about how he felt as though the organization didn't have his back, and he had made 2 or 3 comments, but then he kind of stopped and he said, "Well, Lorenzo Fertitta's always been really, really good with me, but it was what he wasn't saying,
of course,
as opposed to what he was saying." And he repeated that later on, and then eventually you
what
said,
you're really saying when you say Lorenzo Fertitta was pretty good to me, you're basically saying all the rest of them suckers. Though.
Well, I mean, when you eventually said, "Well, what Dana White?" and he kind of was like, "Well, I'm not gonna throw Dana under the bus or something." I don't know exactly what his words were, but it was essentially him saying, "I don't hold that guy in the same esteem that I do Lorenzo Fertitta. Fertitta has been real with me, and how and he kind of seemed to suggest that he felt like this was somebody who really connected with him as a human being, and that's a big deal right there.
I don't blame him for having that pent up anger at the UFC. I mean, when you go back to what the UFC said about him after the cancellation of UFC 151.
What Dana White said to him specifically, right? I mean, that was he was the mouthpiece, and so I think that was the divide.
I mean, the guy who murdered this event and all this, the sport killer, all this stuff. The guy's a champion held in high regard, at least for his athletic accomplishments. How do you say that about this guy that you're promoting? I mean, how does that benefit you? So think about, I mean, Dana, obviously he's an off-the-cuff guy. He says stuff sometimes without thinking about it, sometimes, all the time, without thinking about it. But to say that about your champion, I mean, that's quite a statement. And this is a guy that you're probably going to be building events around for a long time to come. So I kind of understand why Jon, who's a guy that obviously is concerned about his image, has been harboring this resentment for a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that doesn't really go away. It seems like he's okay with doing business with Lorenzo, and Dana's on a different friendship level.
Well, hopefully for his sake and the UFC's sake, if they're going to be in business with each other, maybe him saying this can help, because it always kind of felt like he wanted to say something but didn't. Like, I remember talking to him in Baltimore and he was like, oh, I'm never going to be Chuck Liddell, but he never quite went fully in on how he felt. So maybe there's a reason why he wanted to put that out there. I don't know.
Sometimes it's helpful to put everything out on the table and say, here's where we're at. Now what do we do?
Right.
You know, how do we fix this going forward? I mean, obviously they're going to have to promote him for a long time to come. He's still young. Was he 28? He's going to be around for a while.
Hopefully, yeah.
So at some point they do need to sit down and say, all right, we screwed some things up. You screwed some things up. How do we fix it? How do we mend this relationship? Because the guy is going to be, like you said, I mean, what if Conor McGregor loses? Now, you know, not that you've lost these guys as a draw, but their drawing power is going to be a little bit diminished. So they need to figure out how to. And
to their credit, they were at his plea hearing. They really had no reason to be there, and I think that was a nice sign.
Branch, that's good.
Yeah, I think that was a really nice sign to see them in the courtroom.
But think about it. Jon Jones now says something where he's feeling like he's not a part of the UFC. He's in a business relationship with those guys, but he is independent of them. You know, we heard Conor McGregor talk about not being a company man, but he's the company man.
Okay,
you know,
what a great segue that is.
And then we had one of the best women in the company. You know, Misha Tate has really, and these are the people at the top of the sport. I mean, these are people. Think about some people who are, as you filter down. You know, there's enough acrimony out there, so we'll see. We've always talked about how as are fighters ever going to organize? Well, they're going to. The only way that would happen is if people at the top of the sport were to become dissatisfied. And why would they be dissatisfied? They're making all the money. Well, we're seeing, you know, two of the people who are probably the biggest earners in the company, and we haven't seen them from Ronda Rousey yet, but you know, she was also a huge earner. But certainly Jones and Conor, big earners, and they've got, you know, a little bit of a chink in the armor there as far as the consolidation of their relationship with that company.
My final note on Jon: I'm a sucker for a comeback story, and man, if it happens in MSG, the return of Jon Jones, New Yorker, chasing the title that was taken away from him against his biggest rival, Daniel Cormier. I mean, it's just...
You like comebacks? Are you really dying for that Royce Gracie comeback down in Houston? That's going to be good.
And the Dada 5000 fight too. But I mean, wow, what a fight that will be, right? April 23rd, Cormier. I mean, it's kind of Ali Frazier-esque. It's kind of Tyson Holyfield-esque in a weird way, where Cormier can't get that respect.
Cormier thing too, just having the platform on UFC Tonight and everything that he's been doing with the UFC. I mean, that's got to be burning up Jon Jones behind the scenes.
You can tell when he speaks about it. Okay,
someone needs to send Daniel a map of the state of New York and point out to him that Jon Jones isn't from Manhattan. He's from another part of the state. The people around here, you know, we are within, you know, spitting distance of Madison Square Garden right now as we do this show, and people here, probably half the people in the street don't even know where Endicott, New York is. It's like it's in a different world. So, you know, this is not a home game for Jon Jones if they fight at the Garden.
Sure.
It really isn't.
So you mentioned Conor McGregor. He put out this post on Instagram saying that, you know, I'm not a company man, I'm the numbers guy, I am the company, all that stuff. Also did an interview this week with Severe MMA, great Irish MMA site. They focus, for the most part, on Irish MMA. And, you know, he talks about how he's talked about the tough thing before, how he really didn't want to do it, and they kind of had to, you know, really convince him to do it. And even when he was there the first few days, he did not want to do it. And even towards the end, he was like, you know, I think it was too soon. And he kind of then pins it on Aldo about his health, but, you know, also for people who want to travel, and it's Christmas time. He talked about, you know, all the Irish who came to Vegas in July, and could they come back 5 months later? And I don't know, it just seems like with those Instagram things and him talking about his contract recently, 9 figures, are you guys sensing something brewing here between Conor and the UFC? Am I jaded? What's going on? What do you think?
No.
When he says he's the company, I mean, you got
No, I mean, come on. He's very calculated in the things he says.
Sure.
You know, Conor thinks about what he says before he says it most of the time. So, why would we be surprised if there was some tension between the two sides? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either, by the way, because I think it's good that the fighters are getting a little more emboldened in dealing with the company, and because how else are their purses going to go up? How else is their pay going to go up? It's especially when you have the drawing power of someone like Conor does. Obviously, the UFC wants to put on Conor McGregor events, right? So if they're in that business, you got to pay the piper, and Conor's definitely going to play his own tune. So
I remember
it's not a bad thing.
Having a conversation. I don't know if we were on air or with some of the time. He said when Conor McGregor was getting all the treatment from the UFC, and I think it was you or somebody said it's almost like a love affair. It's almost like when people fall in love and they lose their heads a little bit. It was sort of like that for a long time, And then they had that big Irish event last July. It seemed like that was sort of this big crescendo moment. It's sort of been building, they're drinking the rare whiskey backstage and all this, but it's like sort of been building, and I think that UFC 189 was sort of the tipping point because I think Conor McGregor really thought he was the savior of everything that happened in this card, which he was. He did not back down from Chad Mendes coming in and taking that fight that everybody thought he would be vulnerable against, and he still was able to win it, and just et cetera from there. And I think just all that time then doing tough, out in that very dry Nevada air. It's like, putting him through that whole thing. It's just one of those things that I think in his mind, he's done a lot, and I don't know, you can tell that he's not getting everything he wants in return. And I think that's what's starting to stand out through these things.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing for the sport because, when we saw that real cozy relationship, and I know that was McGregor's narrative, talking about having the fine whiskey with Uncle Frank backstage. That had to irk every other fighter on the roster, especially not just the top people, but the people down below on the roster had to irk them because what was the other narrative about Conor McGregor? Well, he was given favorable matchups all the way to the top. That was the way a lot of people portrayed him. And so this was just sort of playing into that. Now we see that maybe they're not quite as cozy as they once were. And I think that the more that other people see that, I think that it helps the fighter roster as a whole to see that fighters are in it for themselves, and that even the guys at the top, they may seem like they've got a cozy relationship, but we're all independent contractors. That's the term that is always being used by the UFC, and it is something that some people don't really quite understand what it really means, but it is what it says it is: independent.
You wondered about how things would change the second time through because we already tried to dial up Aldo and McGregor, and there was huge build-up. They did this whole press tour and all this stuff. It's sort of funny now that here we are coming full circle because Aldo was the one who had the big beef with the UFC, kind of going into that one. Now all of a sudden you got McGregor that's sort of like, it's just a bizarre sort of circumstance.
It's been a lot more subtle than what Aldo has said, but there feels like there's something there. And he's in LA this time, not Vegas, in the last few weeks. I don't know if that's us looking into it too much, but that fight week is going to be...
He's basically pretty plain in what he's saying. I mean, we're reading between the lines a little and inferring more, but I mean, he's basically saying what we're saying,
Okay, let me ask you guys this second to last topic. It's quick, rapid fire. This Saturday, very early morning fight card coming out of Seoul, South Korea. That's the UFC's debut there, and it's airing on UFC Fight Pass. The main event is Benson Henderson versus Jorge Masvidal. There have been some rumors, some Twitter posts and things of that nature that this is the end of Benson Henderson's contract. I believe it was Jeremy Botter, a colleague of yours, who asked him yesterday, I saw him tweet this out, that Benson wouldn't talk about or wouldn't confirm whether or not it was, in fact, the last fight on his contract, but did say, if I was a free agent, why wouldn't I test the market? And all signs seem to point that that's what he wants to do. Very easy question. Do you think this is the last fight for Benson Henderson in the UFC?
Are you looking for a yes, no?
Yeah, I mean, you can add.
You said too much.
And whatever you say, I'm going to say the opposite, so go ahead.
Because I think this is a very interesting thing developing en route to this.
I'm going to say yes. This is his last fight. I think if it is the last fight in his deal, he's obviously going to get offers from Bellator's. Most of the guys that Bellator's has been able to sort of poach from the UFC have been guys that are maybe a little bit on the tail end of their past their prime, with the exception of, I guess, Phil Davis. So when they have a chance to get guys who are still, young and considered to be among the top talent, they have to jump at that. They have to, and they're probably willing to overpay for it because what's the knock? One of the knocks on Bellator is they don't have the elite level guys. They're pretty good on putting on shows and putting in interesting feuds and things like that. But when you're talking about elite level fighting, their roster can use some depth. Though Benson would fit in great.
Doesn't get much more elite than UFC champion. And a guy, like you say, who's not really past his sell-by date. He really is still a legitimate guy in his division. But the UFC also does have a way of preventing these kinds of things from happening. We haven't seen this before. Phil Davis was really the best guy, the best and most current fighter that we've seen over there, and they were not that
they never offered
they
him
really
a deal.
weren't that interested
and he's coming
in
off
keeping
a loss
him.
too.
and he was not perceived as a guy who was a real exciting fighter to watch. Now I don't know that Henderson is also a guy that's had a lot of decisions. He's not been a KO machine.
He's been on fire. Brandon Thatcher.
His last couple fights, he's changed that a lot. I think the UFC would also overpay a little bit. Maybe they get outbid, but I also think that Henderson still looks at his division as a division that he could own, and so I think he would resign.
What kind of rapid fire was that?
That's as rapid as I can get. Sorry, man.
If he loses, I'd be inclined to say he leaves.
Okay.
If he wins, I would think that the UFC would bring him back. But I will say this. He's been always so willing to jump in. The UFC loves that type of fight. Yeah. He jumped in on the Brandon Thatch thing on short notice. I remember the Cerrone one. That was a good fight. I mean, the last one. And so
you being rapid here.
So that would be my guess.
Food for thought. Did he become so willing to jump in there because he was trying to expedite that contract? Right? Final thing.
Crossed my mind.
Thanksgiving is tomorrow here in the United States, and this is somewhat of a corny sports show thing to do, but why not? Let's do it.
Don't know who'll call him on it tomorrow.
Well, okay, I'm sorry.
No.
What are you thankful for in MMA?
Other than being here with you, fine
There you go.
gentlemen.
That was the answer.
That's
You're
it.
back.
Thank you.
See you, Luke.
18.
I don't know.
You got nothing.
I got nothing. I mean, other than my family and friends, of course. In MMA, what am I thankful for? I guess I'm thankful Jon Jones is back. I think he's the most exciting talent that I've ever seen in a cage. Maybe him and Anderson Silva are pretty close together. So I'm glad that he's bringing his talents back to the octagon, and I hope that he stays on the straight and narrow.
I'm most thankful for the unpredictability. I was so sure that Ronda Rousey was going to win that fight. I've gone back and read my Sports Illustrated preview of that fight, as painful as it was to look at. But although there were moments in it where I actually hit on some things that were true. But I look at it and I think, oh my God, I was so sure that fight was going to go a certain way, and it went completely a different way than I thought it would, and not like some kind of flash knockout, but it just was a sustained, completely different way than I thought it was going to be. And when that kind of thing happens, I think I felt a little the same when Dillashaw dominated Barao for 5 rounds and knocked him out. Those kind of things really that makes the sport so much more exciting for me.
I would say matchmaking and the matchmakers themselves, because when I look back at 2015, I remember just lots of fearless sort of matchmaking, a lot of big fights that were not necessarily title fights, like Frankie Edgar against Uriah Faber, that type of fight. When they were Cerrone welcoming Eddie Alvarez. I mean, these matchmaking this year it's been crazy. And then we got this slate coming up in December. Almost all the fights at the top of that are as good as they get, and I just feel like the UFC this year, particularly, and by extension, Bellator throwing some of these carnival shows on and stuff like that. But it's been fun. It gives you a lot of narratives and all that stuff, and I just have really enjoyed this year's matchmaking.
Surprised you didn't say Nick Lenz.
He crossed
his presence. I loved yours. I'm thankful this guy's back on the beat, not the show, but that you're back on the scene. I will add, I'm thankful for the women. The 135ers and the 115ers in the UFC in particular, because they are such a breath of fresh air in my opinion. They gave us Ronda and Holly Holm, they gave us Joanna, and I just find from an interviewer's perspective, they are riveting, they're honest, they just give us a whole new set of storylines and circumstances and characters to deal with, which we didn't have the pleasure of really covering on a daily basis back in the day before they were in the UFC. They're had the chance to interview Michelle Watterson. They're just different. Her daughter is there with her. You didn't get that in the past. It's different when it's a father and a son. You get mothers in the UFC now, and it's different. And I like the element that they bring to the table now. So I'm thankful for them, and I hope, even though Ronda's not on top right now, that they're still in the women's MMA business. I have a feeling they are, but we'll see.
Throw one that's a pending thank you?
Please.
Free Nick Diaz.
Free Nick Diaz, yes.
The right thing about it.
Yes. And I'm happy you say that. It's stalling a little bit here from what I hear with the negotiations. Hopefully this gets resolved sooner rather than later.
Well, they got to do it, because
we got to keep our...
If Cejudo is going to get his title shot, and they want to have it in Vegas, they need to free Nick Diaz, or else it can't happen.
And we have to keep our foot on that gas. We may have taken it off a little bit because the end was near, at least we thought. Can't forget about the 209 and Nick Diaz. All right, we are done. Thank you so much for joining us on this special Wednesday edition of the show. Next week, we are back on Thursday. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, we hope you have a happy and healthy one with your loved ones, and we'll be back next week to talk about another crazy week, I'm assuming, in the world of mixed martial arts. Tonight, we say goodbye. It's not really tonight yet. It's this afternoon. We say goodbye for now. That is Mike. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week.